Hey there, future diplomats. Getting ready for those UPSC exams. International relations, right?
It's a fascinating field.
Yeah, but some of the theory can be, well, a bit of a headache.
Oh, absolutely. Some of those dense theories, it can be tough to wade through.
Exactly. But hey, you've picked a really exciting field, so kudos to you for that. And look, to really nail that optional paper, we're going to go deep today on someone whose ideas are like the bedrock of political thought, John Locke.
Locke, yeah. His thinking, it's woven into how nations, how they interact today, centuries later.
It's wild, right?
Uh,
Not just some historical figure. We're talking living ideas.
Yeah.
So let's kick things off with consent. Locke was kind of a rebel back in the day, pushed back against that whole kings are chosen by God thing.
Oh, he was radical.
Totally. Said legitimate power, it comes from the people, consent of the governed, that kind of thing.
That's it. And that idea of consent, central to international relations, even now. Like Locke distinguished between express consent, explicitly agreeing to be governed,
Right, right.
and tacit consent. And that one's trickier. Imagine a nation's benefiting from some global institution or from international agreements. Are they kind of implicitly consenting to a set of rules just by being there? Does participating in the whole system, does that imply consent? Stuff Locke was wrestling with. And you know what? It's still debated today. In international law, diplomacy, all of it.
That's such a cool way to apply Locke's ideas to the world stage,
Yeah.
It's not just about treaties on paper. It's about how nations act, how they interact within the bigger picture.
Yeah.
Okay, let's say a nation's like, yeah, we're part of the system. Does that mean unlimited obligation? Where does Locke draw the line?
This is where it gets really juicy and crucial for anyone studying IR. Locke argued that consent has limits. Like if a government goes full-on tyrant, stops caring about people's rights, Locke says, the people have a right to resist. Powerful stuff.
Huge.
It changes how we think about things like intervention, sovereignty, even the responsibility to protect. Big stuff in international relations.
So even globally, raw power, it's not enough. Needs that underlying consent to be seen as legitimate, right? Which, for you UPSC folks, connects straight to theories of statehood, intervention, even humanitarian action.
All of it, yeah.
Okay, but let's rewind a bit before we get too far. Locke talks about this state of nature, a world without governments. What was he getting at with that?
It's a thought experiment. Picture it. No laws, no borders, no one in charge. That's Locke's state of nature. He used it to explore what humans are really like deep down and, the whole point of government in the first place. Now, Hobbes, he saw this state of nature as brutal chaos. Every man for himself.
Yeah.
But Locke, he thought humans were capable of reason, even cooperation, without some ruler cracking the whip.
So not a complete disaster, but maybe everyone just figuring things out on their own, relying on their judgment and a sense of shared humanity.
Exactly. And in this state of nature, Locke says we have these inherent rights that exist even before any political structure. The big ones for him: life, liberty, and property. Now, this is key for international law. How do these natural rights become treaty language, How do they inform those concepts of human rights, universal values, all that stuff that's at the heart of how nations relate to each other today?
That's brilliant. It's like Locke's in the UN building, shaping debates about what every human deserves, no matter where they are. So UPSC folks, make that connection. International law, it often has its roots in these big philosophical ideas about what it means to be human and the rights we all have just by existing.
It's all connected. It's fascinating, right? How Locke connects natural rights, especially property, to when it's okay to resist a government.
Yeah, huge implications for IR. How we view conflict, intervention, the whole shebang.
Oh, absolutely. It's not some abstract debate. For Locke, protecting your life, liberty, property, that was core. So if a government doesn't uphold those, or worse, violates them, what does that mean for its legitimacy? That question. It echoes on a global scale, too.
Absolutely. Big time.
Locke was writing, 17th century England. Things were chaotic. He was living through it. Argued that when a government turns tyrannical, starts seizing property all willy-nilly, disregards the law, people have a right to rebel.
Whoa.
He called revolution a bitter medicine.
Wow, that's
a last resort.
intense.
But sometimes necessary, right, in extreme cases.
So he's setting the stage for modern ideas about revolution, that right of the people to decide their own government. Huge for how we think about self-determination, regime change, all of that in international relations today.
It's all there. And as UPSC aspirants, you got to grasp the nuances. He wasn't saying revolt all the time. Revolution had to be justified. Collective action. when all else fails.
Not just some factions grabbing power,
No.
but a whole society saying, this is broken, we need a new system. Which, you know what, raises some fascinating questions about what role international actors play in all this.
Right.
Supporting movements, opposing them. Think about those debates. Humanitarian intervention, responsibility to protect. That whole tension between sovereignty and human rights.
All connected to Locke's thinking. He believed that even in a revolution, the goal was a new government, based on consent. One that upholds the rights the previous one trashed, restoring a just order, critical for IR.
It's not just tearing things down, right?
Yeah.
It's about building something better.
Exactly. Something that respects people, gets its legitimacy from them. Now, another area where Locke's ideas might spark debate his stance on religious toleration.
Ah, yes. A bit controversial, perhaps, for today's world.
For sure. Locke, big advocate for religious freedom, groundbreaking for his time. But there were limits to his tolerance, right? He argued atheists shouldn't be tolerated.
Really?
Yeah. His thinking was no belief in God, no basis for morality, keeping promises, all that.
That's interesting because today we see freedom of belief as like fundamental. But Locke's view shows how these ideas, they change over time, you know?
Exactly. And he also thought some religious groups, especially ones he saw as intolerant themselves, shouldn't be included in toleration. Raises those questions about where tolerance ends and how you balance individual freedom with keeping society stable. Still debated in IR today, for sure.
So even if some of Locke's specific views seem outdated, the core idea, governments shouldn't mess with personal beliefs that had a huge impact on how we think about human rights, religious freedom, globally.
Oh, yeah.
It's in treaties, declarations. It's invoked all the time in how nations deal with each other.
It's fundamental. For those studying IR, it's a perfect example of how philosophy shapes the rules of the game between states.
Absolutely.
Locke's work, even with its, its limits, it gives us a way to think about individual rights, state sovereignty, and how to build a just world.
This has been amazing, from consent and property to revolution and religious freedom. It's like Locke's ideas are a lens.
Yeah.
We can examine all the complexities of international relations through them, even centuries later.
And we've only scratched the surface. There's so much more to Locke. And I urge all you UPSC folks to dive in deeper, connect his ideas to the world of IR today. It's not just for the exam, it's about understanding what shapes the global system.
Absolutely. As you're studying, think about those connections. How do his ideas on consent play out in treaties, in organizations like the UN? How do his arguments about resisting tyranny connect to debates on intervention, on protecting people from harm?
These are the big questions.
Yeah.
The questions future diplomats, policymakers need to be wrestling with. Locke gives you a foundation for tackling them. It really makes you think, doesn't it? Locke's ideas, they came out of such a specific time and place, but they're still so relevant for international relations today.
It's like he handed us this, I don't know, like this toolkit or something. All these concepts and arguments we're still using to make sense of global politics.
Exactly. And one of the most powerful tools in that toolkit, the idea that government is a trust.
Oh, yeah, responsibility, not a right.
Yeah, right. Not about like divine right or inheritance. It's about the people entrusting power to those who govern them.
So no more ruling just because you feel like it. It's about being accountable, being transparent, serving the people's interests.
And as Locke argued, that trust, it can be broken. If a government violates that trust, doesn't protect its people's rights and freedoms, the people can take back their consent.
Which brings us right back to those big questions, right? Limits of state sovereignty when intervention is justified, the whole responsibility to protect people from tyranny.
These are the questions that policymakers, diplomats, everyone at the UN, they grapple with every single day. And Locke might not give us easy answers, but his ideas, they give us a way to think about these dilemmas, a way that puts individual rights front and center.
It's about finding that balance, isn't it?
Yeah.
Order and stability on one side and individual rights and freedoms on the other.
Exactly. And that's where Locke's ideas are so important for anyone studying international relations. They've been used to justify so much on the global stage, promoting democracy, human rights, but also interventions that, well, some would say were more about self-interest than helping people.
It shows how even the most powerful ideas, like Locke's, can be interpreted and applied in ways that, maybe he never even imagined.
And that's why it's so important to think critically. As you're studying Locke, as you're trying to understand the complexities of IR, don't just take things at face value. Question everything. Examine different viewpoints. Think about how these ideas actually play out in the real world.
It's like we've got this map, right? This guide to political thought. but we have to figure out how to use it responsibly.
Here's one last thing to think about as you continue on your UPSC journey. How do Locke's ideas about the limits of government power apply to international organizations, like the UN? Are these organizations truly accountable to the people they're supposed to serve? And what happens when the interests of states clash with the rights of individuals on that global stage?
Those are some big questions, for sure. The kind of questions that'll shape the future of international relations. So keep those brains working, keep exploring these ideas, and remember the insights you get from thinkers like Locke. They're invaluable as you navigate this complex, globalized world.
And hey, if you found this deep dive helpful, don't forget to like and subscribe to the deep dive for more explorations of the big thinkers and theories that shape our world. Until next time, keep learning and keep questioning.